this is Sarah from the Stellar Teacher Company. And if you are joining me live tonight, I am going to be talking a little bit about some of my favorite tips for teaching nonfiction text structure for our students in upper elementary. And I always like to use slides anytime that I am teaching, just because it helps me stay on track. And so I'm gonna maybe wait just a little bit. If you are joining me live, I would love to know what grade you are currently teaching. Most of the time I share strategies and tips that work really well for upper elementary students. So that's going to be 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, but I also know that I have a lot of people in my audience that teach middle school, teach lower, teach high school. And so it's always helpful for me to know, and let's see, it's always helpful for me to know the different grades that teachers are teaching. I see Christina is teaching 1st grade. Oh, I love it, 3rd grade. I love especially that you guys are interested in hearing tips for teaching nonfiction, especially in the lower grades. Golly, I feel like it's never too early to start helping our students understand nonfiction texts. If you continue to trickle in, like I said, it's so helpful for me to know. And throughout my little session, I want to make sure that this is helpful for you. And so if you have questions, if you have comments, the whole reason why I show up here on Sunday nights is to try to help you guys with different tips or strategies that you can even use this next week. So if you have questions about anything as I get started, I would love for you just to share them in the comments, and I will do my best to answer them. Okay, lots of 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade teachers here. Fantastic. So like I said, most of my strategies are going to be perfect for upper elementary, but it's never too early to start. So Christina, I love that you are here and joining us. Okay, let me see here. First thing, and if you guys want to go ahead again, let me move my slides here. In the comments, if you want to let me know, how do you feel about teaching nonfiction? And I feel like nonfiction is one of those things where teachers either love it or they hate it. And when I first started teaching, I did not like teaching nonfiction. And I think for a couple of reasons. One, I am not a nonfiction reader myself. And so much of being an effective reading teacher is helping students to see the processes and the strategies that you use as when you're reading to sort of make those known. And so I didn't really know what strategies are helpful for students when teaching nonfiction. And then the other thing that was really difficult for me with nonfiction is I realized that students are required to have so much background knowledge in order to effectively understand nonfiction text. And that's one of the things that I'm like, okay, if I'm teaching on a topic that my students have no background knowledge, how can I compensate for that and fill in the gaps? And so for me, it was really a struggle of teaching nonfiction, honestly, until I moved to teaching upper elementary and learned all about nonfiction text structure, which is what we're going to talk a lot about today. Dawn, I love that you read nonfiction. I have gotten to be a lot better about it. I've learned to love biographies and autobiographies. I wish I enjoyed it more, but like I said, I'm working on it. Let's see, Allison, difficult. Yeah, I agree, Allison. It can be difficult to get students to engage with nonfiction texts. Graphic novels. I love the graphic novel trend. I think it's great that we give that to students, but I agree with you guys. These are a lot of challenges helping students to engage with nonfiction texts. And what I've seen in my experience is that a lot of time that lack of engagement comes from lack of understanding. So hopefully we can share some tools that will help with both of those. So today I want to talk specifically about nonfiction text structure and why it's so important. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time kind of talking about why this is such an important concept to teach our students and how it connects to so many other comprehension skills. And then I have 6 different tips that I want to share with you on how you can teach it and things that you want to keep in mind when you're teaching that to your students. So when we talk about text structure, it refers to the way a text is organized, and kind of a funny little story. So I started my teaching career as a 1st and 2nd grade teacher. I spent 4 or 5 years teaching in the lower grades. And then in the middle of one school year, my principal moved me up to 4th. It wasn't what I asked for. I wasn't planning on making the move. I ended up falling in love with it, and that's where I spent most of my teaching career. But it was my 2nd week teaching 4th grade, and one of my teammates says, we're going to be teaching nonfiction text structure next week, and Sarah, can you find some passages for us to teach as examples? And I honestly had no idea what they were talking about. I was like, I've never heard of this term text structure. I don't know what it is. I've never taught it before in the lower grades. I felt a little bit like, am I going to be successful as a upper elementary teacher if I have no idea about this concept that I'm supposed to teach? But I quickly realized that text structure is much more than a standard. It's much more than sort of this standalone concept that we teach and then move on to another comprehension skill. It really is such an important strategy to help our students understanding nonfiction text. So when we talk about text structure, we're talking about how authors choose to organize information in the text. And there's typically 5 different text structures that we teach in upper elementary. And you can see them here. There's description, there's sequence, there's cause and effect, problem solution, compare and contrast. Sometimes teachers will teach question and answer. But these are typically the ways that we teach students that authors organize their text. A couple things to sort of keep in mind. Sometimes authors can organize the text in more than one way. So while we a lot of times ask students to identify what is the structure of this text, sometimes authors will use 2 or 3 different text structures throughout, especially if it's a longer passage. So just making sure that students realize that authors can organize the text in a variety of ways, and sometimes they might see examples of both throughout the text. Now, why is this important? It is important because if students can identify how the text is organized, that gives them a roadmap for understanding the text. If they understand the text structure, it's going to help them predict and sort of anticipate what is coming next. It's kind of like when we're teaching fiction, we teach our students the story mountain because they know to anticipate the rising events, they know to anticipate the climax, they know to anticipate the falling events and the resolution. They can help predict that. The same thing is in nonfiction. We're not necessarily predicting what events come next, but if they understand the structure, they're going to know what to pay attention for. If it is compare and contrast, they're going to be sharing similarities between 2 things, and then they're going to be sharing the differences between 2 things. If it is a problem and solution, they're going to be explaining the problem, and then they might be explaining possible solutions coming next. If it's sequential order, then obviously they know that they're going to be hearing about a variety of events that happen in order. So it helps them give a framework to understand the text. Now, the other thing is that most other nonfiction comprehension skills can connect back to text structure. And this is one of the things, my first year when I taught text structure, I sort of viewed it as this standalone concept. Let me teach my students to identify the text structure, and let's spend a week teaching it, and then let's move on to all of the other comprehension skills that they have to teach. But the reality of it is if they know text structure and if they can dig deep into it, that is going to help them with all other nonfiction comprehension skills. So let's kind of talk about what I mean by that. Let's say your students are reading a passage, a compare and contrast passage on moths and butterflies. If they can identify the text structure and they know that this is compare and contrast, that's going to help them understand the author's purpose. Obviously, the author is writing this text to share with us the similarities and the differences between moth and butterflies. It's going to help them identify the main idea. The main idea is going to be that while moths and butterflies have some key similarities, there are differences that are significant. It's going to help them identify the key details. If the key details do not connect back to either a similarity or a difference, then it's not going to be an important detail that they want to remember. It's going to help them with drawing inferences. If they know that they're comparing these 2 animals, then they might be able to make inferences that help them think about, well, okay, maybe predators are going to be confused between these 2 animals, and that can help protect them. Or oftentimes people can confuse moths and butterflies because they have so many similarities. So it's going to help them think about the types of inferences that they should be making. Summarizing the text. This is one thing that I didn't realize my first year of teaching upper elementary, but when students are summarizing a nonfiction text, their summary should follow the structure of the text. So if they are summarizing a text where it's compare and contrast, they use that same formula in their own summary. So they want to state, the 2 things that they're comparing, share the similarities, share the differences, and then sort of give their summary statement at the end. So it helps them summarize informational texts. And then it can help them explain relationships within the text, whether it is the compare and contrast or the cause and effect. I know that's a big standard up in 5th grade. So if students know the text structure, that really gives them the tools and the keys to understand all of these other nonfiction comprehension skills. So it goes from being a standalone standard or skill that we have to teach to really helping students unlock all of the other skills that they need to have in order to be effective readers and to be able to understand. And that's one of the things that I think is so important, not to teach it as a standalone skill, but to help students realize that text structure is really giving them the tools to apply all of these others nonfiction or all these other comprehension skills and understand the text. So real quick, before we jump in to maybe the strategies to help you teach it, first of all, do you have any questions about text structure and sort of how it connects to other comprehension skills? Or do you have any takeaways? Have I shared anything that you're like, I've never thought about text structure in this way before? It's always sort of helpful for me to kind of get an idea of where your understanding is at, and if I need to go a little bit more in depth before we jump into some of the strategies. So if you have any questions or takeaways, just pop them into the comments and I'll be sure to address them. And like I said, I've got 6 different tips that I want you guys to think about when I'm sharing or when you're teaching text structure to your students. So first thing, you want to explicitly introduce the different types of text structures. And there are really 2 different ways that you can introduce text structure to your students. You could do this in an inquiry-based way. And what that means is you could give your students either a variety of short passages, you could give them a variety of picture books that are informational, you could find a bunch of different articles. One thing I like to do is to try to find texts that are all about the same topic, but written with a different text structure. And rather than you telling your students what all of the text structures are, you have them identify similarities and differences and see if they can figure out that all of these texts might be about the same topic, but they're written differently. So that's more of an inquiry-based approach where your students are the ones that are looking for the similarities or the differences, or realizing that, okay, this one is telling things in order, this is comparing and contrasting, because especially when we get up to upper elementary, students kind of already have some background knowledge on some of the way texts are organized. The other way that you can do it is with direct instruction. That means you are going to tell students that there are 5 different ways that authors organize text, and then you can provide examples of them. A couple things that I like to do when I'm introducing the text is I like to use anchor charts. I like to explain to the students, what the text structure is, include some keywords, possibly include some examples of where they might see this, and then show them the graphic organizer, sort of a visual cue that they can use to sort of then think about how that text is organized. Once you use an anchor chart to sort of introduce it, then you could give students a passage, let them see it in an example, or you could let them look for examples in their independent reading. But in either case, you want to make sure that students understand and know the names of the different text structures. I like to typically introduce them one at a time. So rather than introducing all 5 on one day, you might want to introduce one a day for an entire week. So that way you can really spend some time digging into them. You can use them with your mini lessons. So you're not spending, an entire 30 minutes teaching your students all the different types. You might just be spending, 1 or 2 or 10 minutes teaching each one. The next thing that you want to consider is, let's see, Dawn said, see something that cannot be done in Teachers College. The articles are specifically geared toward reading level. So a lot of topics I teach. Yeah, Dawn, so that it can be really challenging. And so if you have students that, if you're looking for texts that are at different reading levels, you might need to find some sort of supplemental material. The other thing is I think you can give students different clues to help them identify the text structure, even if they can't comprehend it. Or another thing that I love to do is if you have students at such a wide range, and I know especially in upper elementary, you can have students just running the entire spectrum with reading levels, have them work in partners. So especially if they're working to identify text structures, have them work with a partner to try to identify the text structure. Another thing that I like to do though with teaching text structure is to use shorter texts or excerpts when teaching text structure. So rather than using an entire article or using an entire book, just pull out maybe a page or a paragraph, or find shorter examples of text structures. Whether it's a half page, a paragraph. I think so often our students get fatigued with having to read such long texts that if we can give them shorter texts to practice, it's going to make them feel more confident. It's going to help them with engagement. And especially if it's something that we're teaching new and we want them to master a specific skill, then the shorter the text, the better it's going to be for them to sort of grasp that concept. So if you can find shorter texts to use, or even write some yourself, but like I said, a lot of times, even if you have a longer text, if it's a full page, pull out the excerpt that does the best job of identifying the text structure and just use that when you're introducing or even practicing. Students don't have to read the entire an entire page or 8 pages to be able to identify what the text structure is. Other things that you want to do is to make sure that you're teaching your students to rely on more than just keywords. Teaching your students the keywords for each text structure can be really helpful, and it's definitely a really good starting point, especially for struggling readers. If they are not able to read all of the words, they can look for the keywords, but the problem is if we teach them to rely just on keywords, not every text is going to have the keywords for that specific text structure. So you want to sort of use this as a backup strategy, but not the only strategy. So other things that you want to have them do is they can look at the text features that authors include. You want to teach them the specific examples or the types of text that they might see. For example, like a recipe could be an example of a sequence, or like a procedure manual can be an example of like a sequential text. A lot of times if it's an editorial or an article, those can be problem and solutions. Persuasive texts are usually going to be problem and solution or cause and effect. So teaching students or different types of text that they might encounter, and what they might be. Also teaching students specific questions. So if they know questions that are connected to the different text structures, then they can be looking for, does this text answer these questions? So if they don't see the key words, but they know different question stems to ask when they're reading text, that can help them figure out if the text can answer these questions, then that helps me know that this is this type of text structure. So using a recipe, or I always think like Legos, how they have like the assembly guide, like that's a sequential text structure. I think so often we sort of get limited, and I was guilty of this when I was a teacher as well, of thinking that the only way that we can teach students the different text structures is if it is a passage or in a book. But there are, especially with nonfiction, there are so many different types of text that we can teach our students, and that's one way to appeal to interest and to different reading levels as well. The other thing that I think is really helpful with comprehension of nonfiction text structure is teaching your students how to create their own text structure graphic organizers. So most of the time there's kind of this general, and you can kind of see them on this anchor chart here, or even if you just go to Pinterest or Teachers Pay Teachers or Google and search for nonfiction text structure graphic organizers, you want to teach your students that they can create their own graphic organizer, that they don't have to be given one from their teacher. And when students can create their own graphic organizer, it really can help them sort of visualize the text and how the text is organized. So if they know that as soon as they identify the text as being compare and contrast, they could either create a Venn diagram or a T-chart, and then that's going to help them understand and process the information as they're reading it. Or if they know that if they're reading a sequential text, to draw a timeline or number the steps, again, that's going to help them sort of anticipate what's coming next. So even if, like I said, a graphic organizer is not maybe part of your reading response assignment or something, if students know that they can draw a graphic organizer and fill in the information as they're reading, that is going to boost their comprehension. And then especially, again, for students who are really visual, or if we have struggling readers, if they sort of can visualize how the text is organized, and that's what a graphic organizer does. It helps them sort of visualize how the information is organized. That can help them with their understanding and comprehension of the text. And then another thing you want to make sure that you're doing, and maybe you guys are better at this than I am, but I was horrible at using informational text as my read alouds. But it is so important, especially when you are teaching and introducing text structure and informational text, to make sure that your read alouds, that the text that you're reading to your students, or your mentor text for that matter, include a variety of the nonfiction text structures. So that way your students, even if you don't tell them that this text we're reading today is an example of description or an example of cause and effect, if you've taught text structure and you are then reading aloud a text, an informational text to your class, your students are going to be able to identify it. And ultimately, that is the goal. We want there to be a transfer of skills to when they're reading or hearing a book read to them, that they can say, okay, I know the text structure of this text. And so you need to give them opportunities to do so before they get to their independent reading, and your read aloud is a great way to help sort of facilitate that transfer of skills. So whenever you're doing your nonfiction units, or if you are doing, if you are introducing text structure, just make sure that you are looking for read alouds, informational texts that you can read to your students that are going to give them a variety of the text structures so they can practice identifying that in real, authentic texts. And then sort of not the last tip, but the last tip that I'm going to share with you guys for today is you want to make sure students can rewrite, well, not make sure, but one good way to help them sort of solidify their understanding of the text structure, and it also helps with that reading writing connection, is have students rewrite that text using a different text structure. Now, this might require them to do a little bit additional research, but again, this is a good way for them to think about and understand how authors organize information, is if they have to take a text that is written in one text structure and rewrite it in another one. Now, they don't have to rewrite necessarily the entire thing. They could write a shorter version of it, but that helps them. If students can write something, taking something that they've read and write it, that's going to help you know that they understand the attributes of the different text structures, that they understand how to figure out what information needs to be included. And this can be a really great reading response activity. So if they've read something that is, compare and contrast, then maybe they need to do a little bit more information and see if they could do a description, or is there a way that they could pull out some sort of sequence from that? Or is there a cause and effect relationship in there? So having them sort of like figure out, can they reorganize the information? That's really what we're asking them to do here. Can they reorganize the information in another way? So those are my 6 tips for teaching text structure. If you have any other questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. The one thing that I want you to think about, though, and this is really my big sort of takeaway, is that when you dig deep into text structure, you are really giving students the tools to comprehend any informational text. Because if they know how the author is organizing the text, and they understand how text structure connects to all of the other comprehension skills, and they understand how they can draw a graphic organizer to help them visualize how the text is formatted, then it doesn't matter that they don't have the right background knowledge. It doesn't necessarily matter that they don't know anything about this topic before they read it. They have the tools to sort of supplement what they might be missing in background knowledge. So text structure really is sort of the backbone to teaching your students to understand informational and nonfiction text. So hopefully you guys have some tips and some strategies that you can try out this week. I do have a resource in my TPT store. If you are looking for more text structure resources, I do have a bundle of resources. Some of the pictures I included in this are included in that resource, but it's got anchor charts and passages and a little sort and some graphic organizers. So if you're looking for resources, definitely check this out. But like I said, everything that I've shared today can be used with a variety of texts, and really with any nonfiction unit or lesson that you're teaching. So if you guys have any other questions, I can hang out for another minute or two. But otherwise, I hope that these are helpful. And if you are teaching nonfiction this week, hopefully they help. And if you guys are just joining me for the first time on Sunday nights, I usually do Facebook Lives every Sunday. If there are future topics that you would love to hear me talk about, you can always send me an email. I will put my email address up here real quick. Or reach out to me on Facebook or Instagram. I love sharing ideas and strategies with teachers, especially if they're things that are helpful. So hopefully you guys have a great week, and thank you so much for joining me tonight.